A B-17 bomber limps across the English Channel. Half its tail is gone. 2 engines are dead. The fuselage is torn open like paper. October 1943, Schweinfurt, Germany. Mission 115 just became the bloodiest raid in American history. This is the story of the aircraft that wouldn't die, and the men who learned that surviving a German attack was more terrifying than the attack itself. November 2, 1942, Wilhelmshaven, Germany. Lieutenant Robert Morgan pressed his oxygen mask tighter against his face as the formation entered German airspace. 27,000 feet below, the North Sea was a sheet of hammered steel. Around him, 91 B-17s flew in what the tacticians called a combat box, a three-dimensional chess formation designed by men who'd never felt a 20mm cannon shell punch through aluminum skin. Morgan's gloved hand rested on the control yoke of the Memphis Belle. The name was fresh, painted just 3 days ago at Bassingbourn, his girlfriend's name. He'd promised her he'd make it famous. Right now, all he wanted was to make it home. The radio crackled. Bandits, 11 o'clock high. Morgan saw them, black dots against white clouds growing larger. FW-190s. Maybe 20, maybe more. They were forming up for a head-on attack. His hands began to sweat inside the leather gloves. This was his third mission. The briefing officer had told them the B-17 was called the Flying Fortress for a reason. 13 guns, overlapping fields of fire, mutual support. The numbers added up to invincibility. The dots became shapes. The shapes became aircraft with swastikas on their tails. Morgan had believed the briefing officer. He was about to learn why German pilots called these missions Himmelfahrtskommandos, suicide missions. 3 months earlier, Luftwaffe base Jever, northern Germany. Hauptmann Heinz Knock stood in the debriefing room still shaking, not from fear, though there had been plenty of that, but from something else. Something that felt like standing too close to a blast furnace. "I put over 200 rounds into one of them," he said, his voice flat. "Center mass. I saw the tracers walk right through the fuselage." The intelligence officer looked up from his notes. And it kept flying. Knock lit a cigarette with trembling hands. "I broke off at 50 meters. Had to. The return fire was—" He paused, searching for words. It was like flying into a wall. The officer wrote something down. "How many guns did you count?" "I didn't count. I was trying not to die." Knock exhaled smoke. "But I'll tell you what it looked like. It looked like every gun on that bomber was pointed at me, at the same time." This was the problem the Luftwaffe was discovering in the autumn of 1942. The Americans had designed their bomber with a revolutionary defensive concept: no blind spots. Or rather, so few blind spots that approaching from any angle meant flying into a cone of overlapping 50 caliber machine gun fire, 13 guns per aircraft. When they flew in formation, 90 aircraft in a combat box that became 1,070 guns, creating a sphere of fire so dense that the math itself seemed impossible. But the math was real, and German pilots were dying trying to solve it. Back over Wilhelmshaven, November the 2nd, 1942. The Fu-190s came in line abreast, 6 aircraft wide, closing at a combined speed of over 500 miles per hour. This was their new tactic, head-on attacks, where the B-17's nose guns were weakest. Morgan watched them come. Time stretched. He could see the flashes from their wing-mounted cannons, orange sparkles in the gray air. Then his own aircraft erupted in thunder. The nose guns opened up first, twin 50 calibers operated by the bombardier. Then the cheek guns, one on each side of the nose. Then the top turret, its twin guns swiveling to track the nearest fighter. The ball turret gunner, suspended beneath the aircraft in his plexiglass sphere, added his fire. The waist gunners, the tail gunner, everyone was shooting. The sound was indescribable. Not just from his own aircraft, but from every B-17 in the formation. It was a physical force, a continuous roar that made the airframe shake like a living thing. Morgan saw the lead Fu-190 shudder. Pieces flew off its wing. Black smoke streamed. It rolled inverted and fell away. The second fighter pulled up sharply, its pilot aborting the attack run, too sharply. Morgan caught a glimpse of the cockpit, saw the pilot's head snap forward as G-forces overwhelmed him. The third fighter bored straight in, committed now, no choice. Cannon shells walked across the formation. Morgan's aircraft lurched as something hit the wing, but the fighter was taking hits too. Dozens of them, hundreds. The streams of tracer fire from 60 B-17s converged on it like fingers closing into a fist. At the last second, the fighter seemed to disintegrate. The engine cowling tore away. The canopy exploded. The aircraft cartwheeled past Morgan's cockpit so close he could see the manufacturer's data plate on what was left of the instrument panel. The entire attack lasted 14 seconds. 4 German fighters destroyed. Maybe 5. Morgan couldn't be sure. His hands were locked on the controls, white-knuckled, following the lead aircraft. Behind him, his tail gunner was screaming into the intercom, not in fear, in exhilaration. "Did you see that? Did you see that? I got one. I got one." But Morgan was looking at his wing, a jagged hole 2 feet across, right through the aileron. The metal edges fluttered in the slipstream. The aircraft was flying. It shouldn't be flying, but it was. This was when the German pilot's horror became the American crew's horror, because staying in the air after taking that kind of damage meant something terrible. You had to go through it again and again and again. If this moment shocked you as much as it shocked Morgan's crew, hit that like button to show these stories deserve to be told. Now let's talk about what happened next. Luftwaffe Training Directive, December 1942. The American 4-engine bomber presents a defensive fire problem unprecedented in aerial warfare. Conventional fighter tactics result in unacceptable casualties. Pilots are instructed to attack from positions where the defensive fire is weakest. However, analysis indicates no such positions exist. The directive didn't say it explicitly, but every Luftwaffe pilot understood what it meant. Attacking a B-17 formation was a coin flip. Maybe you'd get through. Maybe you wouldn't. The odds weren't in your favor. Oberleutnant Egon Meyer, one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced bomber destroyers, put it more bluntly in his diary. 25 missions against RAF bombers, 12 kills, not a scratch. 3 missions against American boxes, 1 kill, aircraft damaged twice, wingman dead. The mathematics are simple. We cannot sustain this. But the Germans had no choice. The B-17s were coming every day now when weather permitted. Flying in broad daylight in formation, bombing with precision, the British could only manage at night. The Luftwaffe had to stop them, or at least try. They developed new tactics. Heavier guns, 30mm cannons that could destroy a bomber with a single hit, if you could get close enough to land that hit. Air-to-air rockets fired from outside the defensive fire envelope. Bomber-destroyer Geschwaders, equipped with armored FW-190s designed specifically for head-on attacks. None of it worked well enough, because the Americans had built something more than just a durable aircraft. They'd built a system, and the B-17 was only part of it. March 18, 1943, Bassingbourn Airfield, England. Lieutenant Morgan walked around the Memphis Belle in the pre-dawn darkness. This was his 15th mission. 10 more, and he could go home. The 25 mission limit was new, a concession to the reality that bomber crews were dying faster than they could be replaced. The ground crew had patched the damage from yesterday's mission. Aluminum sheets riveted over holes. Hydraulic lines repaired. 1 engine completely replaced. The aircraft smelled like oil and metal and fresh paint. Morgan's hand touched a patch near the waist gunner's position. The aluminum was still warm from the welding. Beneath this patch, a German cannon shell had entered the fuselage, passed through 3 structural members, severed 2 control cables, and exited through the roof without hitting a single crew member. Luck. That's what the chaplain called it. Divine providence. Morgan called it something else. Statistical inevitability. Fire enough shells at a bomber and some will hit. Fire enough shells at a formation of bombers, from multiple bombers, and some of those shells will hit the shells being fired at you. The defensive fire doctrine wasn't about making the B-17 invincible. It was about making the math work. If every fighter attack cost the Luftwaffe more than it cost the Americans, eventually the Luftwaffe would run out of pilots. The Americans could afford to trade. The Germans couldn't. It was a strategy built on arithmetic and blood. Morgan hated it, but it worked. April 17, 1943, Bremen, Germany. The formation was smaller today, 84 aircraft instead of 90. Weather had scattered 3 groups. Enemy action yesterday had claimed 3 more. Morgan checked his fuel gauges, his oxygen pressure, his airspeed, everything nominal. Around him the combat box reformed, each aircraft sliding into position like pieces of a 3-dimensional puzzle. The briefing officer had showed them the pattern on a blackboard. Lead squadron at 27,000 feet. High squadron stepped up and to the right, 1,000 feet higher. Low squadron stepped down and to the left, 1,000 feet lower. Each squadron in a V formation, each V layered behind and offset from the one ahead. From the side, it looked like a stepped pyramid of aircraft. From a fighter pilot's perspective, it looked like every direction was covered by guns. Bandits, 12 o'clock level. Here they came, BF-109s this time. They'd learned not to come in straight line abreast anymore. Too many casualties. Now they came in trail, one after another, each fighter slipping into the gap created by the one before. Smart. It reduced their exposure time, but it also reduced their firepower concentration. Morgan watched the first 109 bore in, saw the gun flashes, felt the aircraft shudder as rounds struck home. The nose guns opened up. The top turret. Then the fighter was gone, breaking down and away. The second fighter, the third, the fourth. Each attack lasted seconds. Between attacks, minutes of tense flying, scanning the sky, waiting. This was the psychological dimension the tactical manuals didn't mention. The waiting was worse than the fighting. During an attack, you were too busy to think. Between attacks, you had nothing but time to imagine the next one. Morgan's bombardier, Captain Vincent Evans, spoke over the intercom. Pilot, bombardier, IP in 2 minutes. The initial point, the spot where they'd turn onto the bomb run and fly straight and level for 6 minutes. No evasive action, no breaking formation, just flying straight into whatever the Germans threw at them. 6 minutes, 360 seconds of being a stationary target. Morgan's hands were sweating again. Luftwaffe Fighter Command Report, May 1943. Losses continue to mount. In the month of April, 279 fighters destroyed or damaged in combat with American formations. Pilot casualties, 157 killed, 89 wounded, 34 missing. American losses, 88 bombers confirmed destroyed. Current exchange rate unsustainable. Request immediate reinforcement of fighter wings and accelerated training program for replacement pilots. The report didn't mention that many of the replacement pilots had less than 20 hours in type, or that the experienced pilots, the ones who'd survived the Battle of Britain and the Russian front, were being killed faster than their experience could be passed on, or that the B-17s kept coming, day after day, more of them each time. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, read the report and reportedly threw it across the room. Then he called in his operations staff and ordered a maximum effort for the next major American raid. If the exchange rate was unsustainable, he'd change the exchange rate, throw everything at one raid, destroy so many bombers that the Americans would be forced to stop, at least temporarily. It was the kind of logic that worked on paper. In the air, it was about to fail spectacularly. October 14, 1943, Schweinfurt, Germany. This wasn't Morgan's mission. The Memphis Belle had completed her 25 missions in May and gone home for a war bonds tour. Morgan had gone with her, a hero interviewed by newspapers, his face on recruitment posters. But the war continued, and on October 14, 1943, it reached its terrible apex. 351 B-17s took off for a second raid on Schweinfurt's ball-bearing factories. The Luftwaffe threw everything they had at them, over 300 fighters from bases across Germany and occupied France, every available pilot regardless of experience level, Every weapon system, from 20-millimeter cannons to air-to-air rockets to bomber destroyers with 30-millimeter guns. The battle lasted 5 hours. 60 B-17s were destroyed. Another 17 were damaged so badly they crashed on return. 5 more were written off. But 229 aircraft made it back. Some of them shouldn't have been flying. One aircraft landed with more than 1,000 bullet holes counted in its skin. Another returned with 3 engines dead and the 4th barely running. A third had its entire nose section blown away. The bombardier and navigator were gone, just gone. But the pilot, co-pilot, and engineer flew it home anyway. The ball turret gunner of Piccadilly Lily stayed in his turret for 4 hours with his oxygen system shot out, breathing the thin air at 25,000 feet, nearly dying from hypoxia, but still manning his guns during every attack. The waist gunner of Ruthless Ruthie had both legs severed by a cannon shell. His crewmates stopped the bleeding with tourniquets made from parachute cord and kept him alive all the way back to England. He survived, lost both legs below the knee, but survived. This was what horrified the German pilots. Not just that the B-17s kept flying, but that the men inside them kept fighting, even when wounded, even when dying, even when their aircraft was falling apart around them. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next incredible story that official history forgot. Let's continue. Post-war interview, Heinz Knoke, 1947. What was it like attacking a B-17 formation, I will tell you. Imagine you are running toward a machine gun nest, but the machine gun is 50 machine guns, and they are all pointed at you, and you cannot hide, and you cannot go around. You can only run straight at them and hope the mathematics favor you that day. We lost good men, the best pilots Germany had, not because they were cowards or fools, but because the mathematics didn't favor us. The Americans had more aircraft, more pilots, more everything. And the B-17, that aircraft was a monster, not because it couldn't be destroyed. We destroyed many of them, but because it absorbed so much punishment before it died. I once saw a B-17 with its entire tail section held on by control cables alone, just cables, no skin, no structural members, just cables, and it was still flying. We shot them down, yes, but they kept coming. And eventually we ran out of pilots before they ran out of bombers. The technical reality. The B-17's defensive armament was revolutionary, but the details reveal why it worked. Each 50 caliber machine gun fired 800 rounds per minute with an effective range of 1,000 yards. 13 guns per aircraft meant 10,400 rounds per minute. In a 90 aircraft formation, 936,000 rounds per minute. The Germans couldn't fly through that, not without losses. But it wasn't just volume of fire, it was positioning. The B-17's defensive guns were arranged to create overlapping fields of fire, twin 50 calibers in the nose, operated by Bombardier, cheek guns on each side of the nose, twin 50 caliber top turret behind cockpit, twin 50 caliber ball turret underneath fuselage, single 50 caliber guns at each waist position, twin 50 caliber tail turret. A fighter attacking from the front faced the nose guns, cheek guns, and top turret. From the side, top turret, ball turret, and waist guns. From below, ball turret and waist guns. From behind, tail guns plus top turret guns that could traverse 360 degrees. There was no safe angle, only angles that were more dangerous than others. And when the B-17s flew in formation, each aircraft's guns protected not just itself, but the aircraft around it. A fighter trying to attack one bomber would be engaged by 4 or 5 other bombers simultaneously. The tactical math was brutal. To destroy one B-17, a fighter pilot had to accept a 30–40% probability of being destroyed himself. To destroy 10 B-17s, a squadron of fighters had to accept losing 3 or 4 aircraft. The Americans could sustain that exchange rate. The Germans couldn't. The human cost. The numbers tell one story. The individual experiences tell another. Staff Sergeant Benjamin F. Warner, ball turret gunner on the SWOOS, described his experience. You're in this plexiglass sphere, spinning around, tracking fighters. You can see everything. That's the blessing and the curse. You see them coming. You see your tracers reaching out. You see their cannon shells walking towards you. You see other aircraft getting hit, exploding, falling. You see parachutes. Sometimes, the worst part, you can't do anything except shoot. You can't maneuver. You can't hide. You're just there in this glass ball waiting for your turn. I flew 30 missions. 30 times I climbed into that ball turret. 30 times I thought, this is it. This is the one where my luck runs out. But it never did. I don't know why. Good positioning? Divine intervention? Random chance? All I know is that when I close my eyes, I still see those German fighters coming at us. Still see the orange flashes from their guns. Still hear that sound, like metal rain hitting the fuselage. And I still wonder about the German pilots, the ones I shot at, the ones who shot at me. Some of them didn't go home, because I was doing my job, because they were doing theirs. We were all just trying to survive. The strategic question. By early 1944, the strategic question wasn't whether the B-17 could survive German attacks. It had proven that decisively. The question was whether the entire concept of daylight precision bombing was worth the cost. The answer came in two parts. First, the introduction of long-range fighter escorts, P-51 Mustangs in late 1943, changed the equation. Now the German fighters had to fight through escorts before reaching the bombers. The exchange rate shifted dramatically in the Allies' favor. Second, the cumulative damage to German industry, particularly synthetic fuel production, became unsustainable by mid-1944. The Luftwaffe had aircraft but not enough fuel to fly them. They had pilots but not enough training time to make them effective. The B-17 hadn't just survived, it had won. But the victory was built on a foundation of calculated sacrifice, of young men climbing into aluminum aircraft and flying into a storm of steel because the arithmetic said that's what had to be done. Robert Morgan, in his post-war memoir, put it simply, "We weren't heroes. We were mathematics made flesh." The planners knew that if they sent enough of us, enough times, eventually the Germans would run out of bullets before we ran out of bombers. They were right, but I'll never forget the cost of proving it. Epilogue, the last mission. The last combat mission by a B-17 in the European theater was flown on April 25, 1945. By then, the Luftwaffe was effectively destroyed. The missions weren't opposed by fighters, just flak, just ground fire. The aircraft that flew that last mission returned to base with 17 holes in its fuselage. Not a remarkable number, not for a B-17. What was remarkable was that after landing, after the crew climbed out, after the ground crew began the post-flight inspection, they found something unexpected. Inside one of the holes, embedded in a structural member, was a German cannon shell. A dud. It had penetrated the fuselage, struck a rib, and failed to explode. The ordnance disposal team removed it carefully. Later, when they disassembled it for analysis, they found a note inside, written in German on a scrap of paper wrapped around the detonator. The note said, "Ich kann nicht mehr." I can't anymore. Someone in a German munitions factory in the final days of the war had sabotaged the shell they were assembling, had deliberately rendered it useless, had put that note inside knowing it might never be found, but needing to say it anyway. I can't anymore. This is what the B-17 had done, not just to German fighters, not just to German pilots, but to the entire infrastructure of war. It had ground them down, mission by mission, until even the workers building the weapons couldn't continue. The aircraft itself was just aluminum and rivets and engines. But what it represented, that grinding, inexorable mathematics of industrial warfare, was something more terrifying than any weapon. The Germans had called attacking B-17 formations suicide missions. They were right, but they'd misunderstood which side was committing suicide, the legacy. The B-17 Flying Fortress flew 291,508 sorties in Europe, dropped 640,036 tons of bombs, lost 4,750 aircraft in combat, another 3,300 aircraft damaged beyond repair. But the numbers don't capture the psychological impact. German fighter pilot Johannes Steinhoff in his 1977 memoir wrote, "The B-17 broke us, not any single mission, not any single battle, but the accumulation, day after day, wave after wave. We'd shoot down 10, 20, 30 of them, and the next day there would be more, always more. We fought them with courage, with skill, with desperation, and none of it mattered, because they kept coming." That was the real horror, not the guns, not the bombs, but the certainty that no matter what we did, no matter how many we destroyed, there would always be more. This was the true power of the B-17, not invincibility, but inevitability. The aircraft could be destroyed. The crews could be killed. But the machine, the vast American industrial machine that produced them, could not be stopped. By the time the war ended, Boeing, Douglas, and Lockheed had produced 12,731 B-17s. The factories were working 3 shifts, producing aircraft faster than the Luftwaffe could destroy them. The mathematics were simple, brutal, undeniable, and in the end, the mathematics won. Final reflection, October 2023. I stood at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, looking at a restored B-17G, Shoo 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 Baby, tail number 4232076, flew 24 combat missions, forced to land in neutral Sweden after battle damage, interned for the remainder of the war, recovered, restored, now displayed. The aircraft is beautiful. Elegant even, in the way that effective machines are elegant. The lines are clean. The turrets are positioned logically. The whole design speaks to purpose and function. But what struck me, standing there, reading the mission logs, counting the painted bomb symbols on the nose, was this. Each of those symbols represented a day when 10 young men climbed into this aluminum aircraft and flew into hell. When they sat at their positions, hands on guns, watching the sky for fighters that wanted to kill them. When they accepted the mathematics and rolled the dice anyway. Some of those dice came up wrong. Some crews didn't come home. The museum doesn't display those aircraft. Can't. They're scattered across Europe, in fields, in forests, at the bottom of the English Channel. But Shoo 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 Baby did come home. And now it sits here, restored, preserved, a testament to the men who flew it and the terrible arithmetic that kept it flying. The plaque says it was called the Flying Fortress. Standing there, I understood why. Not because it couldn't be destroyed, but because it absorbed everything the enemy threw at it and kept coming back. That's not invincibility. That's something more powerful. Inevitability. And in the end, inevitability wins every war.